Сайн байцгаана уу хүнд үзэгчдээ. Өнөөдөр ороо манай дефактоны төрөлгийн зочноор Германы нэрт эдийн засагч, Мюнхений их сургуулийн профессор доктор Hans-Werner Sinn оролцож байна.
Ханс-Вернер Син, Германы эдийн засагч, Эдийн Засгийн Судалгааны Хүрээлэнгийн тэргүүн. 1967-оос 1972 онд Мюнстерийн их сургуульд эдийн засгийн чиглэлээр сургалцсан. 1978 онд Маннхаймын их сургуульд докторын зэрэг хамгаалсан. Мюнхений их сургуульд багшилдаг, Канад, Англи, Америкийн нэгдсэн улсын шилдэг их сургуулиудад зочин судлаачаар ажиллан лекц уншиж байсан. Их Британийн Индепендент сонин, түүнийг 2011 онд Дэлхийг Өөрчилсэн 10 хүний нэгээр нэрлэж байв. Мюнхен хотод эхнэрийн хамт амьдардаг 3 хүүхэдтэй.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Thank you for visiting us. Please tell us what brought you to Mongolia. What is your mission this time?
I was invited by GIZ. This is a German institution for international cooperation. They have an office here, and they wanted to improve the dialogue between Mongolia and Germany.
And how do you find so far then?
Oh, I am very impressed by this country, this abundance of nature, these dynamic people. Wonderful, great impression I got.
You have been organizing with the National University of Mongolia the economics dialogue in the country, and you are part of it. You are giving a lecture right there.
Yeah, I give a lecture tomorrow at the university. Today we had a business talk with a number of people from the city, and there are lots of smaller talks accompanying this visit. It's only 1 week, it's not very long.
And as you see the roads here, the cars, what is your impression about the car and road, the relations between?
It would be good to be able to convert, let's say, 50% of the cars into roads. So convert the iron into beton.
Yep.
That would be a better proportion.
And probably you have seen that we have a brand new big SUVs, cars, very bad roads.
Very impressive. All these big cars. We in Germany have very small cars. You have very big ones, very expensive cars. You must be rich people.
Well, that's the whole thing. We are not rich, of course, compared to Germany. Only a couple countries are rich compared to Germany. But that's the paradox, that we have so many really these sort of cars. Roads are bad. And you were mentioning about converting those cars into road. How we can do that economically? How do you see that?
You earn money by selling your coal to China, say. You get international currency. And you can use this currency either to buy cars in Japan, then they bring the cars, or you can use some of the money only to buy engineers from Japan, bring these engineers here, employ people from Mongolia to work together with them and build roads. You have all the materials you need. That's not the problem. You don't need many international products. So with a little bit of the money, which you use for the cars, you can build many, many roads throughout the country. So what Mongolia definitely needs is a much better infrastructure than it has today.
And speaking about infrastructure, it's a huge country, maybe not 5 times more than maybe Germany, or 3 times, and all the 3 million people. And it's remote distances between settlements, cities, towns. And it will require a lot of money for making an ordinary road. That's why the government is now borrowing money and putting money into the infrastructure. And maybe you have heard about Genghis Khan bond. What do you think about that?
I'm not sure whether borrowing is the right thing to do. Rather than distributing cash to the people, as the government has done, it could have built the roads. Actually, you don't need very much cash. You don't have to buy the full road abroad. If you borrow abroad, what you need is only a little bit of the money to bring in foreign resources, for services for building the roads. The material comes from the country. You don't have to pay for it. I mean, you pay, but you don't have to borrow abroad. You can do that internally in the country.
How you would attract foreign capital into the road, which is not paid immediately?
Well, this is not foreign capital. The government has to borrow, or the government has to better use the funds from selling the resources. After all, there are royalties which the government collects, and these royalties could go into roads rather than lots of other expenses. I'm not sure for what purpose the government spends its money, but one purpose definitely is wrong, in my opinion, namely paying out cash to the people.
Well, because the two political parties who made the coalition, they have promised at the previous campaign cash, and they did everything possible to fulfill that promises, and they take a lot borrowed money and cash.
No, but that's useless. You know, what I realize here, people buy all sorts of gadgets in the world. They have mobile phones. Everyone has a TV set. They have good cars. But this is just a tiny selection of the necessary goods to make a city livable in the countryside. You need better infrastructure. You need good electricity provision everywhere. You need this road connection. The capital in particular needs much tougher planning, I would say. You need a good city structure is a planned structure where a planning bureau says this region is for factories, this is for office buildings, this is for living, this is for parks, and then you have roads. Everything needs to be planned. This cannot be just the decision of the individual companies to decide where to build. Of course, in limits they can do, but the limits have to be there.
So let's talk about the role of the government. Many believe that everything in this country, a former socialist country, that everything should be done, taken care of by the state, by the government. Government has it is not a government function. What is the proper function of the government?
A good economy has a mixture between private and public activity. Public activity is necessary where goods cannot be sold and are jointly consumed, like the road system, the public parks. You cannot charge easily a price for it, and the quality is the same for everyone. So these are typical government functions where the government needs the money, either through taxes or through sales of mineral rights, whatever, not borrowing, I'm against borrowing, and uses the money to build the infrastructure. But the government should not produce goods. Cement industry should not be owned by the government. The government doesn't have to produce electricity. And these can be done privately. And after all, the private economy in the end is more efficient than a socially planned economy, as the history has shown. So the conversion from communism to a market economy should really be carried out to the full, and the government should do what its function is.
You know, we thought we are making us moving to the market economy for the last 20 years. But one morning recently we realized that we came back to a socialist system. I mean, so much state-owned enterprise are created in the country back. And many people say that government should be strong, big enough to solve problems. Please tell us why it is false version.
Problems are best solved by the market in general. If there is a need for a particular product, then the price is high, and it is very attractive for private suppliers to deliver the goods because they can make a lot of profit. By delivering the goods, the prices fall and the profit disappears. So that sort of self-planning is the role of the market. That cannot be properly done by the government because the government doesn't have this profit motive. It is driven by other incentives, and often the government are captured. You know, there are vested interests, there's rent seeking, there are people who somehow collect money through these government offices, which are not the owners and which are driving the whole thing towards inefficiency.
Yes.
So one should limit the government to those functions which are indispensable and cannot be done by private sector, and these should be done properly. All the effort should be going into this.
What's happening in Mongolia is our central bank are issuing a lot currency, money, and they give twice less interest rate for construction builders, suppliers, and then 8% when market is 16%, 8% mortgage rate to selected families by certain reasons, young families, but for smaller apartments. How do you find how long it can be sustainable?
No, this is a very dangerous policy, because if the rate of interest is only 8% while the inflation rate is 14%, you have a negative real rate of interest. So basically this means subsidizing the use of the capital, and if you subsidize this, then there will be an excessive demand. People build homes without care, they build homes at the wrong places, in the wrong quality. It doesn't matter, you don't have to pay for it. Everything pays itself. So this is a land of cocaine which is not real. In reality, resources are scarce, so everything needs a price, and the price of capital is the real rate of interest. That is the nominal rate minus the inflation rate. And that needs to be positive. So no interest rate can be below the inflation rate. It has to be way above it. And everything that deviates from that rule leads to a waste of resources.
When we talk about inflation over 10% or even over 8%, we talk about a huge distortion of market value. Is it possible to plan for that inflation rate?
An inflation rate can be controlled by the central bank. The central bank prints the money, and if it increases the stock of money balances every year by 10%, you will have 10% inflation minus the real growth. So if they constrain the supply of money, new money which they make and lend out to the banking sector, then the interest rates will be higher, there will be less inflation, and there will be less distortion in the real economy. I think this country is overheated. It is building up a bubble. There are all sorts of characteristics that show to it. High real growth, lots of inflation, this huge external deficit of 30% of GDP per year. This is an astronomical number, because within 2 years, in 2011 and 2012, Mongolia was building up a net foreign debt position of 60% of GDP in only 2 years. The entire stock of some crisis countries in Europe is in that order of magnitude, and there the bubble has burst with very dramatic and negative consequences for the people. We have a mass unemployment in Greece of nearly 30%, in Spain also, youth unemployment, 2/3. So this sort of catastrophe results from bursting bubbles. And Mongolia really has to pay attention that this bubble which is building up is being reduced. So you have to make a little hole into the bubble,
so before
little recession, so that it will not explode and burst in the end, destroying everything.
Let's talk a little bit about Europe and then Germany, and then we'll come back to Mongolia. Now your institute is also doing research, and you have a certain forecasting, and you're observing every day what's going on there. How Euro is sustainable now?
Euro is in deep trouble also. The Euro was announced 20 years ago. It was introduced in the year 1999. initially it seemed to work well. It brought lots of cheap capital to Southern Europe, which before had to pay high interest rates. So they borrowed, they invested in real estate, they increased the wages with credit from abroad. The government financed its budget with credit from abroad. For 10 years this was a wonderful thing. It was a party. But then when the American financial crisis swept over, investors were no longer willing to finance this sort of artificial growth anymore. They interrupted the payments, and there was the big crisis, and that's where we are. The southern European countries have been deprived of their competitiveness through this credit bubble, which increased their wages and prices way above the competitive level. And now they are in a long period of gradually adjusting. It's like a person who is addicted to a drug, and the capital market takes the drug away, and then comes the big crisis. That's what Southern Europe is in the moment.
And yet you are Germany, part of that solution, suggesting certain austerity measures and certain disciplines in the southern republics, countries in the Europe. How does it go now?
Well, when the capital market stopped providing more funds, that was in 2007, 2008, the solution for the time being was that they printed the money and lent it out to their economies.
Yes.
And then the solution was that there were fiscal rescue operations to replace the ECB. And so we are still in this mood where it's only public credit from other countries financing the southern countries, but this cannot go on forever. So a real solution for the European crisis has not been found, unfortunately.
Yet you have a lot of German companies, in particular banks, have been investing a lot in the Greece and Spain, Portugal. And what's going to happen with this bad loan they have invested there?
Yeah, they have been bailed out with the printing press of the central bank.
Really?
So they have been able to retreat. Actually, it was primarily French banks. The German banks were lending to the Belgian banks. The Belgian banks were lending to the French banks. The French banks were lending to Greece. So,
I see.
You know, it's a more complicated story. And the French banks retreated from southern Europe, and the Belgian banks from France and the German banks from Belgium and so on, everything was going the reverse gear. So the banks are fine now. They have found an escape way, and they have been rescued with these public operations.
Yet there is a very talk, in particular in front, just prior to your election in Germany. On one side you need, Greece needs additional fund, additional bailout. On the other side, there is a strong sentiment in Germany that how long the German taxpayers can sustain these bad debts.
The German taxpayer, not only the German one, the northern European taxpayers bail out the banks of Europe, also the banks of Britain, also banks of America.
Yes.
It's also Chinese investors, you know, they are all bailed out with taxpayer money. And the countries, of course, are helped insofar as they can continue borrowing for a while. But this is no sustainable solution because the taxpayers are becoming increasingly nervous. And so austerity is demanded from the people, and life becomes more and more difficult, and the economy is in a very, very difficult shape in southern Europe. They are actually trapped in the euro. One must say that. The euro experiment was a great idea, but in the end it did not work out because of these huge imbalances in the eurozone. I don't argue that we should dismantle the euro. Now that it's there, we have to make it a success story. But it definitely would have been better not to start it.
Say, as you said, with the bailout, with the public money, it makes your and other governments who saved government bigger. Their expenses now are bigger. And they have, in your case, I think now deficit is zero. In some other European countries, even certain percent of GDP.
Yeah.
And I was told that there is a particular cases that the German government can borrow money. And there are even cases that you cannot borrow at all. Please tell us about that.
The German government can easily borrow money because its creditworthiness is high. Germany pays the lowest rates of interest, but we don't want our government to borrow. So it's forbidden in the constitution that the government borrows. It was always difficult, and it has been made more difficult, and the German government had to find its path towards a zero deficit budget, and that's where we are now. And by constitution, from 2016 onwards, it is not allowed to have a deficit at all in the budget.
What will happen if they will have?
Well, what will happen if they violate that constitution, then the government can be sued at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, by anyone. Any individual can go to the Supreme Court, sue the government
for violating the law.
For violating the law. And then the government and the parliament will have to take actions to avoid that.
So, German government deficit is zero. There is all expenses, all revenues is expended, nothing more. Speaking about that part, our deficit in the government are becoming now, though we have a law of not exceeding 2% of GDP, that deficit, we now gradually coming to very high level now, but maybe close to 10 or so. What do you think? How
it's 10. Last year it was 10% according to the World Bank estimate for Mongolia.
What does that mean actually for the life of ordinary people?
It means that they are imposed a lot of debt because it is them who in the end would have to foot the bill.
The ordinary people.
Ordinary people, because if the government is overborrowing, someone has to service the debt.
To pay the debt,
it has to be repaid, high interest rate has to be paid, and from where to take? From new funds borrowed for the time being, it may be possible for a while. But the more you play that game, the higher will be your interest rates, and in the end you won't get any credit anymore from the international investors, and therefore the people will have to pay very, very high taxes to redeem all this debt.
Meaning that once you borrow money from abroad, you pay in hard currency as well. You have also the exchange rate risk. Once you borrow in hard currency, and when time comes and you cannot pay, you have to borrow again another hard currency.
Yeah, and
which
pay
will
even
be
more.
Even more, because the two interest rates is together.
Yeah.
So in that way, we pay, say, if ordinary country pays for particular fixed time certain amount of money, then we pay even more.
Yeah.
It's so if you pay debt with another debt, it will be twice more expensive.
Yeah. It's like with an individual. If you go to your bank, they will be able to give you some money at some rate of interest with a risk premium. If you don't repay and want another credit, they look at you in a very suspicious way and are reluctant. Okay, maybe they give you another credit to redeem the old credit, but they will charge very high rate of interest. And if you try to do that the third time, they will say no, and you're
Banks
bankrupt.
will not, but the governments will do probably.
Yeah.
Other governments.
Well, I'm not sure whether others will.
See, in order to avoid
then
this...
if other governments do it, say if you take credit from China, the country will become dependent and lose its sovereignty.
It's even more, It's more you pay. See, now you have a Mongolia, a mineral-rich country, which is using all the money for all the sort of, not for the future generation. We spent all of them for our expenses and the costs. In some cases, we borrow that and still pay our today's bill. What is the best procedure known best to you, up to date, how to avoid this situation? Any fund, whatever?
First of all, in the negotiations with international companies like Rio Tinto, I would be tougher. Mongolia brings in these enormous resources, which are very, very valuable, and therefore it should receive some fraction of the shares of this company without paying for it. They pay with the resources in the ground. So you have a regular dividend income, not only after 30 years, but immediately. That is the first step.
Isn't it not the way you get just through royalty and other...
Through royalties you get already something, but I would... the idea that Mongolia had to pay for having 30% of the shares is somehow strange to me. Okay, now you have your royalties, and possibly in the future, if you do it better with next deals, you have your dividend income, and this dividend income can be used in three ways. It can be used to pay some to the people in form of a welfare system, a social system, good hospitals and these things. It can be used for infrastructure, and some should be used to build up a foreign wealth fund. All resource-rich countries, take the Arab countries, take Norway, take Chile, they all build up a fund. So you have an investment company that invests this money somewhere in the world, and you consume only the interest and don't consume the resources immediately.
Yeah, what happens if the country needs the money? Why they would not use if there is the money inside of the country? You are suggesting to keep the money when the country needs.
Yeah, because the resources will be out at some stage. And I think the Mongolians have children and grandchildren and children of their grandchildren.
So for the sake of
and
their
so
next
you have
generation.
to leave something for them. No?
It's also important to have certain rules of games in the country. Contracts are abided, and the government is making sure that the privately specified contracts implemented, fulfilled. What one is to make for making sure that it happens in the country?
Yeah, well, this is a very fundamental thing for a market economy. You need a civil code, a law system that specifies the contracts. I think you have it, could be improved perhaps, but it has to be implemented. So you have to have courts, judges, the whole apparatus, which makes sure that if there is a contract, people abide to it. It is not possible to have rules and not stick to the rules. This is the most fundamental thing of any society, a market economy with its freedom in particular, that rules are obeyed.
Yes. So what you are basically saying is, well, we have minerals, everything, wealth. Now we need vibrating, working, functioning institutions that make sure the law is there, standards are there, and they are following.
Yes, indeed.
But it takes time, it takes people, it takes resources. How do we do that?
Why does it take so much time to build up a legal system? You have lots of law students. You have very, very many good students. The people are there, so they can become judges and lawyers and so on. This is a fundamental prerequisite for everything. And then, however, you should educate your people also to be craftsmen.
Work with your hand.
Yeah, let me tell you something which I found amazing. There are more than 100 universities for a population of 2.9 million.
Yes.
Germany has 82 million and has 40 universities.
Why would it be like this?
Yeah, well, because
we
have a different education system. Normally, people don't go to a university. They go to a vocational school where they have a technical training. Actually, they have a job in a company. Young people, when they leave school, work there for 4 days a week. And 1 day in the week they go to school and learn the theoretical knowledge which accompanies their actual job. They do that for 3 years, and then they get a degree. They're a master plumber, master electrician, master car repairer, and so on. So you prove that you really learned the job. And this sort of education is, for an emerging economy, I think much more important than economists like me or journalists like you. Yes, some we may need, but not so many.
Yeah, that's one of the bottleneck, I think, of our current development, and everybody wants to be either economist or lawyer. Nobody wants to be a good plumber. Maybe that's the reason. The reason is also because these work have no prestige in this place, paid very little. How to change this presumption? How to make the carpenter, plumber paid well? What does in the economy make them paid well?
Well, if you have tough building rules, for example, standards that have to be satisfied, then skilled people will get a premium because it is very difficult to erect a building according to these rules and make it with high
Very
quality.
good point. So government standards and the tough regulations and this requirement to fulfill it require more higher professional carpenter, plumber.
Yeah, and they will be able to earn a very good salary.
As
and
good
for
as
the
maybe.
for the young people, it will be attractive to become a carpenter, to become a plumber, and so on.
That's today this is very good connection for us to understand that tougher regulations in construction industry will require higher standard of professionalism in this blue-collar worker's job.
Yeah.
And what is it big difference between blue-collar worker and white-collar worker in Germany?
The blue-collar workers earn more than the white-collar workers nowadays.
Wow! Here's vice versa. That's why everybody wants their children to be a boss or economist. And final question. How you will be working with the Mongolian economists, scientists, in this area so that they learn, many of them will learn what you are saying today?
That I don't know. I am here for a week. I have been invited. I became very interesting in Mongolia, and I will certainly bring this knowledge of this dynamic and wonderful country to my people, tell them about it, and let's hope that more cooperation between the countries and the research institutes emerges.
Yeah, traditionally we are, even during the former Germany, East Germany, we had a lot of people trained there, and we have, they say, almost 3% of the country speaking German here.
Yes, I know. I found lots of people who speak German.
And I think this is a good base to grow, and a lot of Mongolians want to learn German standard, German way of professionalism, how you do high-quality buildings, cars. We have more and more German cars now than before.
Yeah, well, this is not my interest. You can be sure when you have contacts to Germany, Germany is not after your resources. No? Germany has no mining companies, so for us this would be not a driving motive. But development aid is a major thing in Germany, also because of Germany's past. So we want to pay back to the world, and GIZ, which is here in your capital, is an important institution.
And GIZ invited you to come here as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good example of contribution to the way we think, work, and be more effective. You know, I found your introduction and your presentation today extremely important, on time, and I think this echo, what you said, will be staying here longer because you were on time and touching real points. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.